Hey guys, Sebastian here with another Cardano update. This time going over the April 19th technical report. So starting out, we're talking about core development, and they're talking about wiring up integration tests for continuous integration, which is right here. So we talked about this briefly before. So basically, continuous integration is a way to make sure that your code is always functioning after every pull request. So if you ever see in any of the Cardano pull requests, you might notice that every time they make a change, some tests run automatically. And so this is what they're doing. They're adding more tests every time they make any change to the code base. And integration means that it's not testing a small functionality, it's testing like a scenario, like try and do this, and then do this, and do this. This is like it's called an integration test. So this is what they're working on here. Next one is the 2400, collecting missing V1 endpoints compared to V0. So it's like I mentioned before, they're transitioning the API from the version 0 to the old version to V1. This transition is still in progress, and they're just making sure everything's moved correctly. They make a note here about dead code where there's a 0 without any modification, blah blah blah. If you don't know what this is the CW unit you find in the code. What it was supposed to be is that 0 indicates a large currency like a Bitcoin ADA, 1 indicates a small currency, but this ended up never being used. So this is kind of what they're talking about, and this came up in this pull request where they're talking about how, actually we just noticed now it's not being used anywhere. So this is what they're talking about when they're saying like it's set to 0 without any modifications. Next up is the 2405, which is a fees included option for the transactions endpoint. So as I mentioned earlier, they're creating a new API, and using the API you can obviously send transactions, but right now there's no way to have an option to include the fees in the transaction directly. So they've decided, last week they're talking about maybe adding this. Now it looks like they've have decided fully they're going to add this, and it'll be completed by the end of the current sprint, which is probably like within the end of the month, I think, or maybe a bit after, because I think they probably do 1 month sprints. I would guess. I don't know. I don't work for IHK, but I would assume they're doing 1 month sprints because they're doing trying to do at least monthly rollouts. Next, we're talking about the API use cases. So stuff like retrieving transaction history, available filters, and rewording of the schema based on the spending password. So we'll go over all of them one by one. So some of them are in here. You can notice like, oh sorry, I forgot to mention this before, like the fees included flag. You can notice in this pull request we saw like a few weeks ago, this is one of the items they want to do. But ended up not doing in this pull request, and they're pushing it back to later. So that's like where this comes from, if you were wondering. Yeah, so okay, so now we're here. Now we're talking about the few use cases for the API doc. So this is where they're adding documentation for how to do various things. If you haven't seen the documentation itself, you can find it on Cardano docs/technical/wallet/API/v1. Also, I put all my links down in the YouTube description, so if you were interested in any of the things I'm covering, just go look at the description. If you didn't know what the filtering is, they mentioned a filtering, available filters. This is it right here. You can filter by balance according to certain operators. If you're wondering what they're talking about related to the schema definition, if you look at the API, every API endpoint has what is called a schema, which is a kind of what the response and the input should look like. And I mean, on this website it's kind of interactive. You can kind of see what the response should look like. And they're talking about problem in the spending password schema. So here's where they're talking about it, and then yeah, they're gonna fix that. That's basically what that is. So what they're saying is that one of the data types for the schemas in here is not correct. So you can see beside every a field, you can see the type it is. If you're not sure like why the schema is formatted this way, if you're wondering like why is it data, why is it status, why is it meta, if you're wondering where these names came from, actually, kind of an aside, I think it's like a somewhere up here. Yeah, they use like a JSON, which is like a common format for JSON responses for RESTful APIs. So if you're interested, you can look up like a RESTful API, JSON, and this kind of stuff if you're wondering why it's laid out that way. Next, we're talking about DevOps guide for the exchanges. We've seen this over the past, like, I think over a month, maybe 2 months now, as they're like working on this API and trying to get all the exchanges to migrate. They've been working on this exchanges documentation, which I've shown you guys in previous videos. And they also have recently few fixes to the documentation that are coming out. So you may be interested in reading that if you're an exchange and you're trying to migrate to version 1 of the API. Next up, we're talking about Daedalus. So there's a lot of UI changes actually. So the way Daedalus is going to look is going to change quite a bit. So that's one thing. But before that, we're going to talk about asynchronous wallet restoration, which is also something we've been working on for the past few months. That's to say, whenever you restore your wallet, in the original version of the wallet, like back in January or whatever, whenever you try and restore, it was really, really slow. Since then, they've made it faster, and now they're making it synchronous, so you can open up the wallet as it's restoring. So I can show you guys what this looks like. So you got some pictures. So you can see right here, when you enter your wallet, you'll put in your recovery phrase to do the async restore, and you'll see the restores in progress. Meanwhile, you can still use the app fully, and the balance will update. You will not be able to send transactions. Sending transactions will be blocked, but you'll be able to see your balance update. They also added this other feature, so if you have multiple wallets, you can see that, you know, wallet A is like a part of the way syncing, even if you're not visually looking at that part of the UI. So I think it's a very good experience. You can see the different UIs also they've added for the different color schemes. It is pretty good. So as your wallet is syncing, you'll not be able to send funds. Also, they mentioned that you will not be able, they mentioned in the code it says you cannot restore 2 wallets at the same time. So just be warned about that. If you have if you've lost multiple wallets somehow all at the same time, I don't know how it's gonna happen, but just imagine you'd have to restore them one by one. So just be prepared for that if that ever happens to you. Next up, they changed the about dialogues, not the teams updated to reflect the current team members. They also changed the UI a bit to move these images up, so it's it looks a little bit cleaner. For the paper wallet, they've ended up deciding that there will be 27 words. 18 are scrambled and 9 are the password. So if you're wondering how many words it's going to be for every reason, just so you know, it's going to be 27. Yeah, it kind of looks like this. If you haven't seen what the paper wallet restoration progress looks like, I forgot to bring it up, but there's a video by Charles where he goes through and kind of shows you what the restoration process looks like. So you can just look up a Charles Hoskinson, a paper wallet, and you'll find his YouTube video where he shows the process. Next up, they changed such that when you press the logs, they'll send you to this a support page where it talks about how to send the logs and whatever. Oh yeah, this is what I mentioned earlier. You can only restore 1 wallet at a time. They've made some changes to the dark blue theme. So if you've been using the dark blue theme, it'll be changed a bit to quote-unquote improve the UI. But it is what it is. They've made some parts of the text unselectable for static UI elements. You might not have noticed this isn't even an issue. But yeah, just be warned, if you really like a copy pasting text off the wallet for whatever reason, some stuff will no longer be a copy pastable. But you'll no longer accidentally select it either. So it is what it is. They're working on the update system for links. I think they mentioned this later on the report. I think I skipped maybe ahead for this one. But yeah, because you might know they released the beta version of the Linux wallet, and one of the reasons it took a while to release the Linux wallets because it's always worked. The Linux wallets always worked, but they never had a good like update story. Like whenever there is new versions and whatever, how do you update them? And this is kind of what this pull request is meant to address. So I think that's about that. Yeah, and they upgraded the electron dependency NTP time check. I think we mentioned this in previous weeks. They made some changes to the API such that now better checks NTP to avoid like bugs people have been having, and also better reporting for whoever needs this kind of endpoint. If you don't know, NTP is like the network time protocol, so we check the time on your computer and sync up with like other servers across the world. Alright, next up, the wallet backend. So this has been like lingering around for the past few weeks. Talking about decommissioning the Cardano SL 1.0 exchange branch. I've talked about this a lot in previous videos. This is like a hack they did like a long time ago for exchanges, and they're trying to get around like get people to migrate off this hack eventually. That's like the short version of it. If you don't know more about it, I think I explained it more in like previous videos, but like honestly, you don't really need to know about this anymore. Yeah, they talk about like a migration plan for how to get people to migrate to the new API. But they've been working on this for a while. Yeah, next up they're talking about the wallet spec. So as you know, they've been rewriting the wallet to conform to a new specification, a new formally verified. I shouldn't say formally verified. It's formally specialized, like a laid out spec. And I've been showing this to you guys as they've been working on this over the past few months. So they're talking about the transaction submission layer. So if you go to the wallet spec, they have wallet spec for tracking metadata and transaction history. And you can check out the section they have right here for all the information. I guess it's like not very easy to read, I guess, because one is long and two is very technical. But if you're interested in like the spec for the wallet, so this is not code, this is just like a documentation, which will then be turned to code. So if you're interested, you can go to like this section right here, or sorry. Yeah, like if you go to the Cardano SL repository, you can go to wallet new docs spec.txt. It's like a LaTeX document, you'd have to render it yourself. But if you're interested, you can like go read up about their vision of like how the wallet should be implemented. They also mentioned they're still working on the input selection. So I also mentioned this in previous video. The way UTXO works is such that whenever somebody sends a transaction, you have to figure out which UTXO to send the transaction from based on which UTXO they own. If what I just said doesn't make sense to you, then like look up UTXO. Probably Bitcoin has the best documentation for like understanding the UTXO model because it's the first one that used it. But so they're talking about how to choose the input the most optimal way, and they're still working on it. So I think this comes from a pull request that's already been merged. I think they mentioned somewhere here that they're still trying to look into it. Yeah, and then next up is yeah, the as-is state design for the wallet. So as I mentioned to you guys last week, they're trying to split up the wallet into, well, I mean, so they're rewriting the wallet, right? And in this new version of the wallet, they have like two separate distinctions. They have the passive wallet, which cannot spend money, and the active wallets, which can. Okay, and for the passive wallets, they actually have 3 implementations, I think. Maybe I have the document open, maybe I don't. It doesn't look like it. Okay, so they have 3 different layers. They have the legacy layer for the old API. They have the kernel layer, which is the new API. And then they have a 3rd layer, which is just for testing, for the tests they run. So this is the kernel layer is the one for the new API. So whenever you say kernel, this is like the version they're working on right now for the new API and new wallet. So they're doing the asset state design for the kernel, which is the new API. If you don't know what ACID is, it's like a database principle. If you just look up ACID, you'll find it. It stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, durability. It's just like 4 nice properties to have with a database. So it kind of become an acronym. There's a library for Haskell called ACID state, which is actually what they're using. You can see if you go to the pull request, they're like using the ACID state library. This is talking about, but before they finish this pull request, to change the way the kernel DB works to follow this ACID principle, they have to do this extended testing infrastructure, which we'll talk about like a slightly later in the report. And the next one, they're doing the generate rollbacks in the inductive wallet. So if you don't know, the inductive wallet is a system they've been building up over time such that you can automatically generate blockchains, and they want to test the ability to roll back. So like you imagine as a test to see if the network runs correctly, you create a fictional blockchain and then have a fictional fork that requires you to like roll back, move to a different fork, and then like reapply the history. So this is what they're working on. And so that's been in the works for a while. Yeah, this is right here. Inductive wallet generated to include rollbacks. Yeah, next up, networking. I think all this stuff, I don't think it's uploaded to the GitHub yet. So I can't give too much detail on this. But then they've still been working on basically the profiling, the block streaming, working on the size of what was it? I don't remember. But it's something related to the size. I think they allude to it right here. I think actually there is like a part of the code that refers to this BI class. So it might have uploaded something. But I'm not too familiar with like this network part of the code base, unfortunately. But they're still working on this, and they're still doing benchmarks. I showed you guys last week that they have like some code up to show how to do like profiling and stuff like that for the wallet, in case you're interested. And they have like a few like a one-off tools that they've uploaded over time to do like a networking benchmarking. Which if you go to my previous videos, like over time, you might find like a few of them. If you're really interested, you can like go grave digging, I guess, to find these various tools. For DevOps, there's a new release coming. So they mentioned that last Friday was the cutoff date. So right now, everything that was done last Friday will be included, should be included. And now until the next release is just testing to just make sure there are no bugs. So this is like a QA, quality assurance. This is kind of what they're going through. They said they found one problem so far, but it should be fixed in the async restoration feature, which should be coming up soon. Should be in the next release, I believe. The rest of the section is mostly talking about like improvements to the Linux updating, which I mentioned earlier. Like a lot of these are just like internal stuff that they've been like dealing with to like make the process faster. Stuff like I think later on they mentioned like yeah, GitHub community, they've changed the default branch from master to develop. So if you've been following, there's been a lot of FUD about like the fact that the master branch is the default branch on GitHub. So if you went to the GitHub Cardano page, it looked like no updates were happening. That's because all the updates are happening on the developed GitHub branch. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, like if you have to basically like a no-git to know what this concept of branches are. Basically, they're doing this. They're making this change basically to make it easier for people who don't know how to program, essentially, to have assurance that there is progress in the project. They also mention setting up like a QA and routine experiments. And I think they also like had some stuff with like pinning the version of Daedalus to use the correct SL instead of like a branch, which is a recommendation by the FP audit, I believe. But I mean, none of this really matters to you unless you're like a developer on this project, I guess. If you've been using Linux and you like on the beta and you've been having issues related to inodes. So if you don't know, like inode is like a way for Linux to store files internally. If you've been having issues, it's because the way Cardano stores the blocks is fairly file inefficient, and it's something that they've wanted to fix for a while. Which is to say, whenever you store the blocks in your computer, it'll create a bunch of like really small files. And operating systems nowadays are not good with very small files. Not just Linux, Windows also does not handle them well. And they've been wanting to fix this for a long time. They have documentation up on their code base, a proposal to how to fix up this small file issue. And they're saying that if you're on Linux, you may be running into this small file issue. And they're also saying that because of this problem in Linux, they're like possibly putting more work into fixing up this issue. And they also have like a recommendation if you hit the inode limit as a way to like alleviate this issue. So if you've been having this issue, like try following these steps. I mean, not steps, this advice, and see if it fixes the problem for you. Next up is Cardano decentralization. It's like a new section they've had. For the delegation, essentially they're just saying that they're still doing work on their research paper. It should be released soon. So if you haven't been following UISK YouTube channel, they've been putting up new videos recently, a few different presentations, one of them being on the delegation and the game theory behind it. And they're talking about how the paper should be almost out. Pool applications, as you probably know, started at the start of April. And they will be ending on April 30th, I believe. So if you want to register a staking pool and you haven't yet, now's the time to do it because there's not much time remaining. And they're just saying that this paper is coming out and they have to put it out soon because the testnet for staking will start and they have to like put this out before that, I guess. Related to as the incentives, so this is related to like the incentives for staking probably, I think. So I think these two are like kind of related. Networking is kind of what I mentioned earlier. About like block streaming is still something they've been working on, still testing. I showed you guys maybe like 1 month ago some of the testing benchmarks benchmarks. I showed you the benchmarks and also some of the results they had. I think in last week's video or last week's report, they also mentioned like some new results from some new benchmarks that I think were like comparable to the old ones, at least from what I could tell from my interpretation what they put out. This is for like a HTTP block syncing. They're also talking about the peer discovery, which I think is interesting because I show you guys like maybe like a last month or so that they started recently putting more effort into the diffusion layer of the Cardano project. So if you don't know Cardano SL, the settlement layer is split into like many different components. One of them is called diffusion, which handles like subscribing, like finding other nodes in the network, downloading blocks from your peers, uploading blocks to your peers, all this kind of stuff. It's built on something called Kademlia. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up. There's a Wikipedia article on it. It's a very well-known distributed hash table. So many different cryptocurrencies use it along with a lot of different like decentralized like processes for like file storage and whatnot. So if you're interested, you can easily find like videos about this on YouTube and a well-written Wikipedia article. Oh, I forgot to mention also the in the report they talk about the incentive, or are they like the delegation presentation they made, which was apparently in Hamburg. I don't think that talk has been uploaded anywhere, but apparently they made a presentation and they made a tweet like not too long ago about being in Hamburg for like a blockchain mania, so that may be where it happened, but I don't really know. Yeah, for the score specification, I don't really know what this means exactly. They're just talking about transitioning towards a new delegation system, I'm not sure if this means like the IOHK delegation, which is like the current state of affair, to this distributed delegation where many people run their own delegation or staking pools. I'm assuming this is what it's talking about, but I don't really know. But I don't think this is like particularly an update. They're just talking about how a specialist has joined to extract the spec of the current system. But we've yet to see who the specialist is and what extracting the spec of the current system actually means. Lastly, we're talking about miscellaneous work streams. So this is testing for the KCC, which is the K compiler, if you don't know, on a large AWS infrastructure. So this is what they're doing to set up the testnet for the smart contract, which is pretty exciting. So talking about how testing has been like a slowly delayed because they're not familiar with AWS, which if you don't know, this is like the Amazon cloud hosting provider. So they're trying to set everything up on AWS to have the smart contract testnet up and running. And they're saying they're working with runtime verification, which is the contracting the company IHK is contracting out to make this EVM compatibility with the K programming language and all this kind of stuff. So they're saying they're working on that. That's the end of this report. Pretty long one. They're bringing longer every week. Hopefully this was informative. If you want to see more videos from me as I continue to go over these weekly reports and also talk about Cardano in general and thoughts I have about various parts of the project, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also find me on Twitter, on Reddit, all other social media. I have a Patreon also, all that good stuff. So hopefully you can be on this journey with me as we learn more about this exciting project. Thank you.